everybody, and welcome to this session. And thank you, everybody, for your patience. We're running a little bit behind today. Next, we have on stage is Ardi. I'm just going to welcome them on stage now, and they're doing an amazing talk on sculpting consciousness. Welcome.
Hi, thank you.
Thank you so much for your patience today. Take the time, get your slides up. While they're doing that, I just want to know what everybody's beverage of choice is today. Are you a coffee drinker? Are you a tea drinker? At the moment, I am an energy drink person because I'm quite tired from yesterday, but trudging through. We've got water there, amazing. Well, thank you so much for your patience today, Ardi. I will let you get on with the session and meet you back for the Q&A.
Cool. Sounds good. Hello, all. Thank you for joining this session. I'm probably going to talk fast. I always give that a warning just because I'm always so excited about the things that I'm presenting, and I use a lot of different slides. But basically, what I'll be talking about is something I've been exploring for the past year, very concentratedly, but for a long time. And that's sculpting consciousness. And I'm doing it through a lens of mythopoesis, AI, and the Symphony of cultural metacognition. So, okay. So I wanted to break down, I reread the description for this talk last night, and I was like, whoa, that's a lot of things that I was saying. And I just wanted to break down the things that I am introducing in this space. For one, a lot of it is exploring both the collective consciousness and subconsciousness. And you'll see how these different thinkers that kind of coined these terms have influenced in the work that I'm doing. When I say mythopoesis, I'm saying basically what it means is using the practice of myth making as a way of creating, like a creative practice around myth making. AI is pretty self-explanatory. And then cultural metacognition is me thinking a lot about how different cultures, the awareness of that form of thinking, the metacognition, so cultural metacognition. And as an artist, I'm blending all of these different ideas together into my practice, a synthesis of that. And through that, I am able to explore both practices of myth and also how myths serve as a tool for psychoanalysis, which have for me been an amazing opportunity to study and better understand both myself and society. So I'm going to break it down into 3 different phases. This is how I've been exploring it. First phase, and generally when I have been exploring these different phases, it's been me overall studying how we experience and see the world. I feel like that's my thesis right now within my art practice of how are we exploring and understanding this world. And so in the first phase, which I did for most of my life pre-AI, was through studio practices with a variety of different mediums, but very much with photography and thinking, how do I want to frame this reality? I think the perfect role of a photographer and what they naturally do is consider what do they want to include in this frame and what do they want to exclude? How do you want to romanticize the mundane? How do you want to tell a story with a single image? When I entered the AI space, I was able to use it in a way where I could use it as a way to study reality, and that being a medium within itself. And post AI, I love these comments, y'all. Yes, look all that stuff up. But post AI, I have been able to bring all the lessons that I've learned by being a technologist back into my art practice, and have allowed me to explore how do I want to create my own reality. And so you'll see how I've been doing all of those things. So let's start off with photography, studio art. So thinking about how do I want to frame this reality? Well, I'm going to speak to you from the perspective of how I've been a creative technologist after a lifelong time of being a studio artist. And so this is the lens that I'm coming through when I give you this philosophy that's coming up. But generally what I did after having spent a long time being an artist and then also being in the tech world is take a look back at the things that I was doing, because I found like there's so many mediums that I love to explore, but I needed to find what is the thread within my work and what is my philosophy? What am I trying to do? And so I realized I have this philosophy that I equate to ants, bees, and trees. And it's a very earthly paradigm, but all of them represent different things. Ants being representative of on a lifelong level, ants are who we are when we come into this world. We are these small little beings. We're very influenced by the worlds around us. We have a micro understanding of the world. Eventually we leave our hometown, which has been so influential in shaping who we are, our parents, our family, our friends. We leave that, or maybe we don't physically leave it, but we kind of leave it mentally, ideally, to explore new ways of being. And it doesn't have to be leaving your hometown. It could be just going to a different class, leveling up in a different grade, but you're just being exposed to different ways of thinking that challenge your own ways of thinking and introduce something new. And that's the B stage, where you're now bringing together all these different ideas and synthesizing them. And then trees are at that moment where you have a product of that labor, of that bringing all these different things together and creating these sorts of trees. That's on a lifelong level, but then there's also the artistic practice. And this is what really drew me to this, or like realized that I was doing this, because as I was entering the AI space as an artist, I realized, oh, these two things aren't really doing that different of things. As an artist, I am making small little things. I'm like bringing together these different materials. I'm then synthesizing all these different ideas together. I'm studying other artists. I'm studying other ways of being, and I'm putting it together. And then eventually I create an art piece, and it's a manifestation of all this work that I've done. And so it's very similar to what AI is doing in a creative way, this generative form of AI, where it's using all this data that's been collected for a long time, over a long moment of history, and blending it all together, synthesizing it, and then it's creating outputs based off of all of its synthesis. And so human creativity, computational creativity, I'm realizing, oh, it's not that different. And so when I study that, and then also think about the process of this, of like, what is my artistic process? Well, oftentimes we have different shoulders, and shoulders I use as a metaphor for mentors, but you don't always have access to the people that are mentors. You could just admire someone from afar. They could not even be living anymore, but you're standing on these different people's shoulders, or these different ideas, or at these different like philosophical shoulders, and you start to gain ideas. And then with those ideas, you start to create forms. How is that idea going to manifest into the world? And then there's this experience. How is it going to exist within the world? And that's that tree. And so this for me has like been very representative. Okay, this is my artistic process. And I've shared it with other, especially students. Sorry, I'm talking so fast, but I have so many slides, but I share often with students. And I find that it helps them just grasp what it is that they're doing and be very intentional. And in these moments where I saw so much dissonance between creatives and artists, in looking at these technologies and feeling like they are jeopardizing their creative practice, because it's so easy to create such beautiful things now with generative AI, what I've just tried to remind people is it's never about the technology. It's never about the tool. Once you become an artist where you've honed in so well on your craft, whatever comes through you is going to radiate with a certain energy in the world. And so anything that you're doing, it's going to synthesize through you. So your style, your signature, your upbringing, your culture, way of being, seen, etc., all of that, no matter what you touch, if you know that well enough, anything that comes out of you is going to have this energy. And so not to fear these tools that, make it harder to recognize someone's signature. And so I took a look back and studied what is a survey of my own art practice. What are things that I've done? And so I realized sometimes what I like to do is completely try and put myself in shoes of other artists. Matisse is one that I'm very fond of, and his approach towards the later parts of his life, where he did paper cutouts, limiting himself to just paper, glue, and scissors. And so what could come of that? And for one, as an artist, I also really love creating confinements for myself, because I find that allows me to explode in possibility. When we have too many options and choices, then we're thinking about all those options and we become overwhelmed, as opposed to thinking about what are ways that we can just tap in and get creative. And so by having such limited tool set, now I can get in and find all the possibilities. So I started to do my own paper cutouts and see what could happen from that, and just be so excited by the fact that there are infinite outputs that could come out even when my tool set is so small. And so my shoulders being Matisse, also indigenous symbology. I've always studied all my life different groups of people and their spiritual ways of existing. And so that's been very influential into my aesthetic. And my tree is this documented process. I haven't finished the art piece yet, but just documenting how I've been doing that becomes this tree. Another one, sometimes your shoulders could be professions, like scientists. I love the practice of science. I also was a research affiliate at MIT Media Lab Space Exploration Initiative, and I've really admired the work of Howardina Pindell in her annotation over her work. And so I blended all of these things together, where I created these speculative celestial plants, so plants that might exist in extraterrestrial space, and then annotated them as if they were real, really just to have fun in a way where it's very scientific. And I'm also exploring senses that we know we have these 5 senses, but I've believe that there's so many other senses that we don't even know. So creating this whole story around plants that could have all these other ways of interacting with the senses that we aren't even aware of. And all of this is coming together. The tree will be this book. I'm the founder of a space called Afrotectopia, an institution. And so we're creating a book thinking about space life through this cultural and very speculative lens. Another one that I've done a lot is biosonification. And this is where I convert plants' energy into the data of plants' energy into soundscapes. And I usually grow a garden every summer on my roof, and I like to use different sensors to grab that data, and then I also do a lot of sound design and create the soundscape around it. And the tree would be this soundscape that I've built. Shoulders being friends were sending me these videos of this guy on YouTube that was using sensors to do exactly this, but with mushrooms. And so they knew that I would be interested in this, and they were right. And so I was able to explore this, but through my own lens. It synthesized through me, and it became something of my own. And I'll wrap up my survey with another work that I had done called Mythopoesis. I did this in 2020. So there was a lot going on, protests, but also COVID, so much turmoil. And for me, it felt necessary activism can be a space where we challenge systems, but it also needs to be a space where we heal ourselves. And so I wanted to create an environment that allowed people to heal themselves for free using different modalities from around the world. So percussion tools that have been used across the African diaspora, like the djembe drums, which have been even used in different revolutions, and how that's been such a healing property. Also, the correlations between sonic frequencies and energy centers or chakras of the Eastern philosophy, and blended them all together and 3D designed this environment that was web VR in space, where you could walk through and heal yourself, ideally through sound and color and architecture, psychogeography. And each of these different nodes had their own soundscapes that you could listen to. And it's available online. You could go to metamorphosis.fm and you can experience these soundscapes. So for me, it was understanding, okay, humans are synthesizers, creativity is a synthesis, and artistry is a constant dialogue. I really needed to ground these two things of our practice as creativity is a synthesis, but also what does it mean for artistry to be in constant dialogue? And I think art is something that requires community to be around it. You can exist within your own little world and create art where no one else would see it. But I think oftentimes really how art exists within the world is very much people are surrounding it and have a way to communicate about it. And so dialogue is something that's really interesting. And I think dialogue became something that I started to focus a lot more on in the past year as generative AI started to explode. When this tweet came out, which went viral on saying the hottest new programming language is English. And so what does it mean that we've had these technologies that have existed for decades, but now that the entry point is purely language, now all these people can come in and explore and bring their own flair to it. So I wanted to explore how, what does that mean? Like, what does it mean when we're now using language to output into image, video, sound, animation, presentation, all of these different things. And so I wanted to explore what is the power of language, which I don't think we really think about. We kind of use language all the time, even the way that I'm using language and the way that you all are in the chat. We use it, but we have to study what is it doing to us and how is it impacting us. And so for me, I started to realize, okay, language is this materialization of social constructs. And I'll break that down as if language represents the ways that we understand the world, our values, our identity, our expression. Rosie, I think you said 5 minutes left. Let me know in the chat if that's true, because I thought we were running a little bit behind, and so I have a lot to go through. But so it dictates our culture, psychology, all these sorts of things. So language, understanding what language is and being aware of that. And so for me, it became necessary to inquire, what are alternative ways to understand the world? If I understand that language is a concept that's been created by people, so it's not objective, what does it mean? Sorry, y'all. Okay, cool. I'll keep going. What does it mean when we think about how this is a concept and it's not objective? And so we can play with that. And so what I started to do was look for alternatives. And so one of them was an amazing one by Marimba Ani, where she has this book called Yurugu, where it's an amazing approach to anthropology. Often anthropology is this Eurocentric lens that's studying other groups of people. And so it has this bias, a very inherent bias, but it doesn't even recognize it. It's not self-aware of that. And so this book is flipping that, where it is an Afrocentric lens studying Europeanism. So what does it mean to understand this is just a way of being? It's not a fact. It's not a pure way of being. It's just a concept. And so what Marimba does is break down, what does it even mean to be a knower or have a fact or an object? And in European logic, which is pervasive in all the ways that we think, it's a global way of thinking, it's become so dominant. Logic is very much removed of spirituality, emotion, interconnected context, meaning. We kind of have these illusions of objectivity, and it's immersed itself into the academic world of Plato's influence in that, and all these ways that we understand logic, that it's not, we don't have to confine it to that. And so becoming aware of that, I then wanted to use AI to reveal the structures of the world. How could I use the fact that this AI system, which is not objective, it's not even a truth, it's just a reflection of this group of people. How can I use this tool to study this group of people, study myself as well, because it's influenced me and all of us, but how can I use it to reveal this world? And so that took me to phase 2, which is all about how do I want to use the understanding of quote unquote reality as a medium using AI. And so what I started to do was using, I think this was Stable Diffusion, I would upload an image of myself. And then I would, when you use these tools, you do prompt engineering. And so prompts are, you use words to create something out of it. You can upload an image, then use a word, and it will blend those two to create something new. So I uploaded a headshot of me, and then I would give it just single word attributes and see how it would change my appearance based off of its understanding of that word. And so to see things like Gothic, okay, that's pretty clear. We know usually Gothic has darker makeup, but scientists, how it would sort of age me a bit, or Nigerian, how it would darken my complexion, or elegant, how it kind of would lighten my complexion, or if I even changed to this one of programmer, how it would change my entire race and gender. Because this is, it was more of, it has this word and there's so much metadata around that word that it's using to create something that's reflective of how that word has been used most dominantly in society. And so this became a tool that I labeled as a practice I labeled as computational anthropology, which is how do I use the machine, which is synonymous for AI, computation, online society, to study how we have presented ourselves, study how it has grasped us based off the ways that we presented ourselves. So using metadata as a framework kind of thing. And so I would go back into this practice and even do things like study the archive. And so like reimagine the archive, recreate the archive. So I would go into the public domain, look at images from long ago. This was a collection of images from missionaries traveling around the global South. And so to see how I would use the way that they caption those images, and then use that as a prompt inside of the inside of AI tool, and then have it recreate images based solely off the prompt, no image, and see how well it was able to recreate those images. But when I would add certain context, it would change the images a bit, which would reveal a nuance that I don't even know if it understood it was doing. So things like, I could say men on horseback at a wedding in Ethiopia. When I would say by African photographers, it would reveal the faces of the subjects. When I would say by white photographers, and I did this in different examples, so you don't see it here, but I would say by white photographers, you would only see the backs of the subjects. If I said in National Geographic, it was a bit more romanticized because National Geographic is a travel magazine, so it wants to make locations alluring. If I said in Red Cross, it would like kind of make the environments look more desolate because that's a charitable organization. So it's not trying to create something that looks nice, it's trying to create something that you would fund and support. So just to see how, at least with the race of the photographer, this, for me, it revealed a form of voyeurism that it recognized. When someone of a community is taking photos of people in that community, there's a comfort there. When people that are not of that community are taking photos of people that there is not that comfort, they don't have that, the subjects aren't going to stop and look at the photographer. They're more just going to casually exist, and it's more of a candid style photography. So these were things that I was exploring. Or even with this image, the original image is actually the top right one, Benjamin Pap, the elongated image, which is an appearingly Black man, phenotypically Black. But if you look at the other images, it doesn't understand that Benjamin Pap could be a Black person. It's just thinking about 1880, the name Singleton, and doing the fashion very similar and the photography style very similar. But it doesn't understand that this could possibly be a Black person. And this is because the technology defaults to whiteness. And so it was just using technology to understand what is happening in the society. And even me, I started to play around with myself a lot. And this was immensely impactful to my understanding of my own identity and my own possibility in this world. And I'm really excited to study this a lot more because it really affected my psyche. And I was working actually with a group of technologists while I was building this, while I was exploring this, and all of us had these moments where we were looking at ourselves in the mirror a bit differently. We felt a little different about ourselves when we were able to create images that really allowed us to see our own beauty and recognize that. So I started to create my own really glamorous lifestyle, and doing that and seeing myself in these spaces, I started to imagine myself in that space. And so that was a bit of a confidence booster. But then also to redesign my identity allowed me to understand how I was so rigid in the ways that I had existed prior to this, of being someone that was performing something that I didn't even realize I was performing. And I think we all are really performing our identities. We want people to associate us with certain things. But when we kind of break free of that and see ourselves in entirely different ways of self-representation, it kind of really reveals itself of, oh, this is actually a performance. I could wear my hair however I want. I can wear whatever I want. And I think that's a really liberating thing. But generally what I was doing was kind of just trying to find the perimeters, the borders. I just wanted a level of awareness so that I could transcend it and use it in a very intentional way. And so I was using AI as a tool to understand cultural metacognition, breaking down what is contemporary Western intelligence and not putting it on a pedestal, but recognizing it's just the way of existing of these groups of people and it's pervaded all of us, but I could reject it if I want to. And so that then it took me to the third phase of how do I want to use AI to create my own reality? And so this brought me back into the studio. And so again, while I was trying to develop this level of awareness within society, and using AI as a way to navigate that, I also wanted to study myself. So what's happening with me and how I've been impacted by society. So what are, for one, the limits of my own imagination? I was studying the limits of AI, but for personally, what are my own limits? What is the architecture of my own psyche? Studying myself in the way that I think and perceive the world. And what are my truths as a human and as an artist? So in the second phase, I was studying truths as a way to reveal, this is the way that this society is structured. And we can be oblivious to the truths, and that's fine. You just live in this flow of society where you don't question it. But for me as an artist, I wanted to become more aware of my own truths because I found myself out of flow. I found like as a technologist and having grown up as an artist where I was always creating whatever I wanted, and then to be in a technologist where I constantly have to learn new libraries, I wasn't in a flow. And so I wanted to return to a flow and study myself to know what are my truths, so now I could just enter it completely. And so this turned into me creating my own art residency to study myself, study what are my truths. And truths, when I say truths are just something that we accept to be true, and then we release the cognitive load in understanding that. And I think once you're able to do that, you have a level of confidence. If you stop questioning whether or not you're a good dancer and you just dance to the music, you don't have that awkwardness. And so for me, it was really, how can I, in this third stage, study myself to a way where I can just be confident about the way that I'm existing, minimize my thinking, maximize my doing, and enter this flow. And so in my studio practice, I was using chaos to reveal clarity. So in the same way I was using chaos within AI to just play around, study what's happening, and eventually truth will reveal itself. My psyche was being revealed to myself in a way where I wanted to use it so I can empower and manipulate it to best serve my art. So if I understand that if trigger points, there are different trigger points within me, and I know that those trigger points have metadata around it, of emotional metadata, which is maybe I have an emotional response to something that someone did to me. And I understand the reason why I have that emotional response is because there's this metadata, this story that I've told myself and associated with what they're doing, how I'm perceiving it. And I can decide to tell myself a different story so I can operate differently. And that's then a practice of sculpting my own consciousness. So how can I design the way that I'm thinking so that I can exist within this world in a way that feels most aligned to myself? And so that took a lot of just mapping things out, studying myself, and then trying to create archetypes based off of these different elements within my psyche of understanding, okay, this is what I do when I'm in this setting. This is how I operate here. This is how I feel when these kind of things happen to me. And so I throw in a little bit of research here, but really it was me studying and observing in a scientific process purely by just intuition, perception, exploring, creating, making. And often the scientific practice is very empirical in a way where it's very cerebral and intellectual. But I think when we bring in emotional understanding of the things that we're doing, then that reveals so much. And it also is just more natural to us as humans. And so I wanted to do an art practice that would reveal my psyche by making. And as I was doing this, I was coming across, and I'm gonna wrap up in a little bit, but I was coming across some brilliant minds, one being Joseph Campbell, who is amazing in studying how he devoted his entire life to studying myths, and also found a lot of patterns within myths from around the world over a variety of social epochs and time eras. And so what he concluded from that was there is something about our psyche as a human that is very similar. And we often kind of tell the same story. We're often having similar archetypes within these stories. So when we engage in myth making, we're really studying ourselves and better understanding our own psyche. And then there's Carl Jung, who I feel like I'm really just carrying his baton in my life's work, where he coined a lot of these terms of collective unconscious, which is similar to what Joseph was studying, but him through a psychoanalytic route of when we tap into our unconscious, there's something collective about it where there are threads that are tying all of us together. Things are revealed within the ways that we think that are very similar. So for me, that was sometimes people, when I've presented this to different groups of people, sometimes they'll ask me about me spending so much time studying myself and what does it mean to have such a like self-involved practice. But for me, what I'm realizing is it's not really a self-involved thing. It may appear to be self-involved, but really what I'm doing is studying society. As I study myself and become better aware of who I am, I'm really becoming better aware of the world and the way that we all operate. And Carl Jung does that too. So what I did was, I'm gonna wrap up in, I have like a few more slides, probably 5 minutes, but what I did was started to create different symbols, characters for my psyche. What I did was I wanted to turn it into a myth. So I've created my own myth where I've created different characters that represent the different archetypes of my psyche, but also archetypes of relationships that have been around me. And so what I've now done is use this as a foundation for my art practice and my research practice. So sometimes I'll take on the characters of these, I'll take on the performance of these different characters and use their way of thinking to now navigate things. So an example of that would be, well, I'll go back to an example of that in a second. But another way that I've also brought in AI within this, because while I was using AI to study the truths of society, I also want to use AI within my own practice to create truths. And in one way that I've been doing that is by creating images, AI generated, so that I can have this visual and then go into my studio and paint it. And for me, it's not so much about the technology, but really it's about the process. How can I just want to create something that is visually pleasing and representative of what I'm trying to do and not have to think. And so by having a visual framework, I'm able to enter this moment of flow because I'm just recreating something that I've already designed with other tools and bringing it back into my studio to engage in this meditative process of making that image, as opposed to just leaving that creative process to the computer. So some of the characters I've represented figuratively in these paintings, and the others I'm going to represent abstractly. But again, the myth has become my foundation. And so now I'm finding different ways to study this myth by creating portraits, but also by creating performances. And so I'll wrap up with this project of what I've been working on more recently is the Symphosynthesis de Atsukazo, which again is that biosonification of plants. But when I showed you that in the survey earlier, that was me just experimenting. But now, because I finally have this thread that's taking over, making my work a lot more consistent, I can, what I'm doing within this performance is I'm taking on the roles of multiple characters and bringing them together. One of the characters in my story has the form of a sun. Another one is the form of Mother Earth. And then another one is the child of both of those, which is all about art in the public realm. And so by using the love of sun and plants, which is photosynthesis, and then taking on the role of the sun, which is using his parents' love and creating a soundscape around the energy of plants. Now I'm taking on this role and continuing to tell the story of Atsukazo. And I do this for a few reasons. For one, we've really undervalued the power of plants. And that comes from, again, this predated understanding of logic and understanding. Aristotle kind of relegated plants to being this not important thing. They don't speak, they don't move, so they don't have as much importance. And for me, they have a significance. They are the energy that they radiate, and to give their energy a voice, an audible voice by creating a soundscape was really important. But then also there is this quantumness to plants in the ways that they engage in photosynthesis. It's a quantum way of being. And quantum is an element that I've really studied a lot in building my myth, because that's something about the psyche that I think there's a sort of cycle of quantumness that I'm exploring, and I'll have to break that down another time. But to use a symbol of quantumness was really important. And then also the relationship between plants and indigenous communities and them having recognized their significance, whether it's using medicinal plants to understand knowledge and through musical transmission, but also this way of being in indigenous communities is something that has existed all over the world, of understanding a relationship between sound and spirituality. And so to use the sound of plants to engage in these forms of spirituality was really important. And recognizing even their healing elements, like Akatos here, of how it's been recognized all over the world. And so that's what I did with this. I'll wrap up with sharing how, again, using AI, but in a way where it's not about replicating that world, but me just using it as a material to continue in my own world. And so I created this 30-minute film for the Simple Synthesis de Atakazo experience, where I made images, but then a lot of post-editing to create the visuals that we see here, and then collaborated at University of Maryland with dancers, where I projected this film on a huge screen and told the dancers about the myth. And they embodied the ideas of these different myth characters, while also responding to the beat of my music, which I do often in a biosonification form with my modular synthesizer. So it was this entire collaboration of creating this world in a very abstracted way, and ideally a hopefully spiritual, and tapping into the subconscious by using sound. And so really all I'm trying to do, I'll wrap up here, is create a lens that cultivates seeing the world, the wonder of the world. We use science in a way that really confines our way of thinking, and we think we don't have to ask any questions because someone has figured it out. And really, that's just a thesis by someone. They haven't figured it out. This is what they know right now. And I think we need to be a lot more wonderful when we look at the world, and not have all these borders and boundaries, especially in academia, of thinking that science, chemistry, and dancing are different things. They actually are all blended. So to create this space of oneness, and also just to reintroduce this practice of using myth as a way to understand the world. Myth is just as important as science. And it's the way that we've always, as humans, understood the world, is by telling ourselves stories that reveal a lot of things about our own psyche. So really what I'm trying to do, Atakazo is the name of that myth. I didn't mention that before, but it's the name of this practice where I'm blending the possibility of collective unconscious through rituals, understood through mythologies and rituals, and our collective conscious, which I can study through technology, and what happens, what's the art possible in combining both. So thank you. And I don't know if we'll have time for Q&A, but I can answer questions through email or something.
Yeah, I think we have, well, I think our Q&A is glitching out, to be honest. But I was about to say, to be honest, I think people were just in such awe of the presentation. There's been such lovely comments in the chat. People are saying genius, absolutely brilliant, amazing. This is excellent work. Really love this holistic approach to this all. So I think it was definitely taken very, very well. And I know I was just sitting there just absorbing that information, because it's a lot, but it's very interesting, and it's amazing work you're doing, Ardi. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I really, really appreciate it. And as you said, if anybody has any questions, I'm sure they can find you on LinkedIn or other places, and see all the amazing work you're doing and pop you a message. So again, just really appreciate you coming today. Very privileged. And thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you all.